And it's a 3-hour class today. And so we're going to take breaks at the top of each hour, just so that people can get a little coffee or cake and take a bathroom break. So just to introduce myself, I moved from the US to Denmark a little more than 2 years ago and work for Septima now. And I do a mix of spatial analysis, cartography, and spatial analysis and teaching. I'm also a QGIS author. I've written several books through Locate Press, which I'll talk about at the end of the course. And I'm an early adopter of QGIS. I started using QGIS. It was in the very early days of Twitter when I saw a tweet about QGIS and downloaded it in 2005. And it was only at version 0.6. And it was kind of cute, but it didn't do too much. But I've started following it, and it wasn't long before it did become useful. And I've been teaching QGIS since 2009 when it was at version 1.0. So I've been around the project for a long time, and I'm an OSGeo charter member as well. And I think it would be nice if we have everyone just briefly introduce yourselves so that we can kind of know where we're all coming from and maybe what you hope to learn in the course. So I'll just start at the top of the list here. Gladys?
Hi, yes, I'm Gladys and I live in the Netherlands. And I work at an urban planning bureau. So most of the time I'm drawing zoning maps. But for now I always use AutoCAD. So now I have to switch to GIS. So I hope to learn a lot of beautiful things to make nice maps.
Fantastic. And let's see, next on my list here is Jesper.
Hello, my name is Jesper. I'll try to look into the camera. I work for EDF Denmark. We have the maintenance contract for city lighting for some cities and municipalities around Copenhagen. We also do some EV charging stations and whatnot. I was in my earlier years, I was working with an ESRI version of a GIS program, and then I think 6 or 7 years in the new company I work at, we were introduced to this QGIS, and now we use it every day, all the time. And I'm like the person in charge of the project templates and make sure that it's running and whatnot. So I know a lot about it, I would say. So I'm here for the small details, and also I'm like self-learned. I just got the program and that was told to start clicking around and figured stuff out. So I'm here to pick up on what I missed along the way, and especially the last section of the course. I believe the management of styles and symbols and whatnot. So I'm especially looking forward to that, and really hoping that we make it to the end.
Oh yeah, we will make it to the end. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Anna's.
Hello. I work for the Swedish Post and Telecoms regulator. So, and I've been using QGIS for quite a few years now, but it's not my main tool. So, and every time I'm starting a project, and usually it's quite I don't have that much time. So I want to improve my abilities to make nice looking maps a lot quicker. So that's probably my main goal today. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, and Alice.
Hi, I didn't hear anything, so I just hopped on the session right now because I had some struggle with my headphone.
Oh, okay.
And actually, I also have some struggle because I'm sitting here in a quiet zone on at work. So I'm not supposed to speak so much.
Okay.
But my main goal is just well, we have to make some nice maps once in a while, and there is a place for improvement always from my side. So I'm
Yes.
looking for some inspiration.
Okay, great.
Yes.
And all that you missed was I was just explaining that we will, you're welcome to interrupt me with questions. And if you can try to use the chat. Sometimes it's difficult for me to follow the chat while I'm teaching. So if someone asks a question in there, maybe someone who isn't in a quiet zone can tell me that there's a question that needs to be answered. But you're welcome to use the chat or to interrupt me and ask questions as we go through the material. And so this was the map that gets posted on the course page. So these are some of the symbology tricks that we're going to learn how to work with today. Shape burst fills for lakes, using inverted polygon shape burst fills to render the sea around land. In this case, there's other uses for that as well. Using random markers with SVG symbols, categorizing lines and using hashed line styles. So we'll cover a number of things like this and more during the class. We're also going to look at labels. And you'll also get a certificate from an official QGIS certificate for the course that will look something like this, but it'll have your name on it. After the course, I'm going to be giving you the video of the course so you can rewatch that. And I'm going to give you an assignment and also some step-by-step instructions. So everything that we cover today, I'll be giving you step-by-step instructions for. And I'm going to give you just a short assignment where I ask you to complete 3 or 4 of the tasks that we cover in today's course, just to show that you managed to learn the skills and you turn that into me, and then you earn the certificate at that point. I'm going to start today just by showing a few slides on cartographic principles, because I think this is sometimes gets lost in the mix when we're making a map. And of course, symbology, which we're talking about today, becomes an important part of designing a nice map, one of the best tools. So whenever you're making a map, I encourage you to kind of think critically about what the purpose of your map is. Who's the audience for your map? What is it on that map that the map reader should see first? You know, what's the topic should be brought to the foreground of the map, and everything else should be symbolized so that it falls to the background. And so to do that, you need to think about contrast, colors, and other symbology tools. So just to make sure that the correct features are getting what we call visual weight. Visual weight is just the thing you see first on the map. And I know that I think I'm the only native English speaker here. So if there is something I say that doesn't make sense, or if I say it too fast, please ask me to repeat it. And then you want the least important features to fall into the background. And so one thing I like to do occasionally is think about, what makes a good map good? What makes a bad map bad? So I think these are some of the questions you can ask yourself to judge a map and how effective it is. So does it convey the desired message? So if it's about an urban plan, is that plan clear on the map? Is it appropriate for the audience? So if this is a map you're going to show your professional colleagues who are familiar with the topic and the data, that you probably don't have to be as careful on the map because they already know some of the topic. But if this is going to be something that goes out to the public, then you have to usually explain symbols and data sources and things a little more clearly. Also, obviously, is it accurate? Is it complete? And is it attractive? And so this is one case of a bad map, I think, on the left, and a better map on the right. So this is just a map that is showing these polygons, and it shows the number of cases of AIDS per 100,000. And the thing to note here is that this is using this graduated rendering, which we're going to learn about here in a bit. And it's breaking the polygons up into categories by the number of cases. And both maps have the same breakouts: 0, 1 to 3, 4 to 8, 9 to 15. But this map uses kind of random dark colors, and it's just not intuitive to look at. Whereas here, when you're showing this kind of map, a data map, it's more intuitive to have the category with the highest value be a more saturated, brighter color than the category with no cases here. So this, call it a monochromatic, a single color ramp that goes from like light yellow to dark orange in this case. And so it automatically, intuitively shows you where the densest cases are. So those are the kinds of thought processes you have to go through when you're symbolizing data. And it goes to this quote. This is an American cartographer, John Wright, and he said, "The quality of a map is also in part an aesthetic matter. Maps should have harmony within themselves. An ugly map with crude colors, careless line work, and disagreeable, poorly arranged lettering may be intrinsically as accurate as a beautiful map, but it's less likely to inspire confidence." And I think that's absolutely true. And one thing, to always remember is that it's very difficult to make a really nice looking map quickly. And we're often all confronted with deadlines, but I think you have to put aside some time to really make a map. And sometimes you have to tell your supervisor that if you want this to look really nice, I need a little extra time. Because the little details can take a lot of time to work on. Another factor when you're working on a map is this focus of attention. There's this feature on a map sheet called the optical center. And so the optical center is, if we look at this map sheet here, the optical center is where we can identify the physical center of this sheet of paper by connecting the 4 corners, and that's the center of the sheet. The optical center will just be a little bit above that. So that's the place on a map where the average map reader's eye is going to go to first, to that spot. So that's usually why we try to put the focus of the map in that part of the map sheet. And then you design the other map elements around that. The other thing to be aware of is that most map readers will kind of start up here, quickly scan down to this optical center, and then kind of move down. So you kind of look at a map from upper left through the center to lower right. And that's why it makes sense to put the title at the top in most cases, because that's one of the first place your eye is going to naturally go, through the optical center. And then down here, it makes more sense to put a legend or your logo or the date, other things like that that have to be added to the map. So most important information, like the title in the upper left or the top of the map, least important to the lower right. This is just a guideline. It's not like this is a rule that you have to use on every map you produce, but it's kind of just a basic graphic design principle. Then there's this idea of figure and ground. So the figure is the important objects on the map, the parcel boundary or the water lines, whatever the topic is, and you want that to be the focus of attention. And then the ground or the background, things that fall into the background of the map. Then we have the role of color. So color is one of the tools we use to achieve all these design principles in a map. It's one of the funnest parts of designing a nice map is using nice colors. But one thing to be aware of is that colors have physiological and psychological reactions when we see them. They evoke emotions. And depending on the topic you're working on, there may be colors in some field that mean certain things. So you always have to be aware of that. And there's also colors that are considered warm colors, like reds, oranges, yellows, and colors that are kind of feel like cool colors, blues, greens, violet. And then there's color blindness. Is there anyone here who's colorblind? No. A large, I forget the percentage, I should know this, but a large percentage of men are colorblind. And so if you're not colorblind, you should see a number here. You should see a 45. And I can, if people are interested, there are some tools in QGIS you can use to put the map into a mode where you're simulating what it would look like to a colorblind map reader to see if your symbology would work for them or not. So in QGIS, we have a color picker that lets us choose colors in several different ways. So this H, S, and V stands for hue, saturation, and value. And so I'm going to explain this a little bit more on the next slide, what those numbers mean. But you can see here, we're looking at a red color, and the saturation is anywhere from white to pure red. The value is black to the pure red. And the hue is basically the color on the color wheel. We're at the red end over here. Then we can also define the same color by red, green, and blue numbers. These go anywhere from 0 to 255. So if you had 0, 0, 0, that would be black. If you put in 255, 255, 255, that would be white. And anything in between is the rest of the colors we have to work with. There's also an opacity slider here. And then QGIS also gives you HTML or hexadecimal codes for the color that you're working with. So we have like here 3 different ways to cite the same color. So with colors, one of the easiest ways to think about them is this hue, saturation, and value model, because the hue is the color wheel where you have the primary colors like red and blue and yellow and green around the perimeter. And then if we're choosing a red color, the saturation will be where that color falls between the pure hue and white. And the value will be between white and black. And so in this triangle, you get every variation of this hue that you can have. And so in QGIS, going back, sometimes if you want a color to just be a little bit darker or a little bit brighter, using these saturation and value sliders can be a really effective way to just tweak the color a little bit to find the perfect color. So in QGIS, we have this color picker, and it has all these great tools like a color wheel that you can use to identify colors, color patches you can use to select colors, and it has a color picker too, where you can sometimes you need colors that match your organization's logo or something, and so you can use the color picker to sample a color anywhere on your desktop and use that color in QGIS. And then if you right click in the layers panel on a symbol in QGIS, you'll also get this color wheel popping up, and you can use it to adjust the color for that particular symbol. So the color tools in QGIS are fantastic. And one other note about designing maps, if you are going to design one of these data maps where you have, let's say, all the municipalities divided up by population or something like that, and so you have a color ramp and you've broken them into some number of categories. When you're using a single color ramp like reds or blues shown here, map readers can't distinguish more than 7 colors in one of these single color ramps. So if I were to add an 8th color, you would start having trouble distinguishing 2 neighboring blocks and seeing which polygons on the map correspond to that. So never use more than 7 colors if you're using a single color, because it becomes pointless. So as an example, this is a map Pandora, the music service, put out a couple of years ago were the most popular song in each US state, but it becomes very difficult to identify which state belongs with each color because there's so many similar colors of blue. It doesn't really work. That's just one example of that phenomenon. So moving into QGIS symbology, we get different options based on the geometry and the data model. So we're focusing mostly on vector with a little bit of raster data today. So points, lines, and polygons will each have different renderers. We'll look at raster in the afternoon, but there's also mesh and point clouds that have their own interfaces to style them in QGIS. And certainly in QGIS, kind of the old school way of working with symbology is to open up layer properties for a layer. So to do that, you would right click on the layer and open up layer properties. And then you can go to this symbology tab and you can change the symbology, but you have to click apply or OK to dismiss this window and see the symbol change on the map. And there are better ways to do that. There's this thing called the layer styling panel. So if you click this little button at the top of the layer panel, it will open up the layer styling panel. And you can do all your symbology from this layer styling panel, but you see the result on the map immediately. So another thing that it's probably obvious, but it's worth saying, when you add a new layer to QGIS, it provides just random colors to it. And those are rarely going to work for you. So you also always need to change those random colors to something more meaningful. So starting with points, we have a lot of different renderers. When you first add a point layer to QGIS, it gets styled with this single symbol renderer. So that means every point has the same color, the same size. But there's other choices. We have categorized and graduated, which we're going to look at here in a few minutes. And so these are based on attributes where you identify an attribute that you're going to use to symbolize that feature with. There's also several renderers in QGIS for rendering points when they're tightly clustered. So there's a point displacement renderer, a point cluster renderer, and a heat map renderer. And we'll look at those this afternoon, sorry. There's rule-based, where you write an expression to identify which subset of features get a symbol. There's even no symbols, and there are good use cases for having no symbology tied to a feature. And so this is what the layer styling panel looks like here. And so when we are working in QGIS, we have this, and you have the single symbol for a point layer. There's both the marker component of the symbol and this simple marker, which is what QGIS calls a symbol layer type. And you get different options for these. So we have a single symbol renderer here, and we have this kind of hierarchy. We can select marker or simple marker and get kind of different options for how to change that symbol. So for example, here we have the single symbol renderer. And if I choose marker, I can change the color or the size and the opacity, and that's it. But if I choose simple marker, I can change the size, the fill color, the stroke style, the stroke width, all these different aspects. I can even choose different shapes from this shape browser down below. So choosing the simple marker symbol layer type is going to give you many more options. And then whenever you see a color bar in this layer styling panel, you can click on that and get this color wheel and interactively choose colors. And this is really nice because you can simply use this to try to find just the perfect color, and you can see the colors change on the map as you're using that color wheel. Also, the way the interface works is if you see this color bar, you can left click on it and then open up basically the color picker that I had a slide on earlier, where you can use all these different interfaces to choose the best color. So QGIS has a lot of renderers for each different geometry type. And then it has these symbol layer types. So by default, with points, it's going to be a single symbol renderer, and it's going to be a simple marker. You have all these other choices in here, and we're going to look at some of those this afternoon. And also QGIS will frequently add new ones. So at QGIS 324, line burst and outline line burst were introduced. Also raster line and outline raster line. And then at 326, animated markers, which allow you to add animated GIFs as the symbol for a point, were added. So there's always new symbol layer types coming to the software. So for today, the data that I provided you, if you unzip that, has a couple folders. It has one for elevation data, and I've given you several different elevation data sets to work with. There's a styles folder that has a couple style files that we will look at. And then there's a geo package. And this just has some point, line, and polygon layers for Denmark. And there's also a QGIS project file in there that we can open up. So let's get to styling some points. I'm going to get out of PowerPoint and into QGIS. So here I'm going to switch to my browser panel, and I'm going to find my course data. I've set it up as a favorite, and this is just does everyone know about favorites in QGIS in the browser panel? Okay. They're basically a way for you to activate or identify a folder that's nested many directories deep on your file system and have that easily be accessible. So I can browse my file system and go into like my documents, for example, and find some folder that I want to create a shortcut to, and I can right click on it and add it as a favorite. And that folder will then show up here in my favorites as something that I can easily get to. So I created a favorite for today's course data. And so I can see the Symbology geo package. And if I want to open up this Symbology QGIS project, I can simply drag and drop it onto the map canvas, and that project will load. And so we have in here just like a nice assortment of data that we can use as a sandbox to play around with Symbology with. And so the municipalities and the airports are turned on. And I'm going to start by turning on the layer styling panel, which is this button here at the left side of the layers panel. You can also use F7 as a hotkey to open that up. And it should open up on the right-hand side of QGIS. And the layer styling panel will tell you at the top which layer you're interacting with. And this will be the one that is selected over here. Since airports is selected, it's the one that is active in the layer styling panel. If I select Comuna, then it will switch to that. If it doesn't switch, you can always just click the drop down menu and choose which layer you want to work with. And so if I choose simple marker, I get a variety of choices here. I can start working with increasing the size of these airport points just by up clicking or using the entering a number. There's also different units here. So you can use the default of millimeters, but you can also use like meters at scale, which would be meters in your coordinate system. So if you want a point to literally be 100 meters across at the scale you're working at, you can use change this to meters at scale, for example. So you can change the units, but the default of millimeters works for most cases. You can then work with the fill color, and I could, click the down arrow and use this color wheel to change the color of my points. And that's a nice intuitive way to do that. You can also work with the stroke color, which is the outline. So I can make the outline a dark blue or black. There's recent colors down here, and there's also standard colors. So you can use those color swatches to quickly choose a color. If you don't see the color you want, then double clicking on that color will bring the style panel to the color picker, where you can use all the different tools in here to pick a color or enter one. And then once you've entered something like that, you always have to click this go back blue arrow to return to the main Symbology panel. There's also different shapes down here. So I could choose any of these shapes to change the shape of my points to something else. I'll keep it at circle for there. And so what we're going to do here is, I should mention, even like the stroke style. So this isn't something that you often do with point data, but I have options for the outline of these points. The solid line is the default, but maybe I just want to choose no pen, which would be no outline at all, or a dot line, for example. So you have a lot of choices there, and sometimes it's easy to overlook those. Sometimes changing something like that just gives you the exact look that you want. With points, there's also rotation here. So it doesn't really make sense with a circle, but if I have a triangle, for example, and I start increasing the rotation, the points will start to rotate. And so I can choose a different rotation. And there's offset, and these will simply shift the point in an X or Y direction based on the offset that you put. So sometimes that's useful as well. So this is all options that we get with this simple marker. And this simple marker is the default symbol layer type for points. So this is where a lot of the magic in QGIS can happen with Symbology, is clicking this symbol layer type menu and looking at the other options. So since these are airports, I could choose, for example, an SVG marker, and then I could use an SVG symbol for airplanes. So with the SVG marker, I get different options to configure this style. There we go. There's an SVG browser, and I can use the search box at the bottom to search for them. So I can type in plane and choose one of the plane icons, or I might search for airport, typing in air, and get different results. So you can search through these, or you can go to individual folders in here and try to find icons that you're interested in. So I'm just going to choose an airplane icon. So now my airports are styled with that airplane icon, and I can go up here and increase the size of that. I can also, well, this one, and I'll cover this later. I have a slide about this. Sometimes an SVG icon that you've loaded doesn't allow you to change the fill color and the stroke color. The nice thing about SVGs is that they are text files, so you can go in there and edit those with the parameters that would allow you to change the color in QGIS. I'm going to go in here and choose just a different icon like this, which will allow me to change the colors. So now I have these a different SVG icon for airports, and I can go in here and choose a different color for these and have that go up on the map. Yes.
So some of them are gray and some of them are black.
Yes,
Are the grays the ones that you can change the color, and the black ones you are not able to change the colors?
that's correct.
Huh?
So all the ones that ship natively with QGIS have should allow you to alter the color. But I think if I hover over some of these are these, if I hover over it, you'll see the path where that is sitting on my file system. And that's useful because you know where to save these or edit them. So I can hover over this and see that this is from this collection of Mapbox Mackie icons that I downloaded. And so these are not set up to allow QGIS to change the colors. But the ones that are gray, correct, are ones that I can adjust colors for. Yep. And since we're here, why don't we just look at that real quick? I will share this PowerPoint with you too. This is the kind of thing that's good for on GIS Stack Exchange, which is where I found this. I'll put this link in the chat. But this slide shows what you have to do to modify an SVG, and it is simply an SVG you can open up in a text editor like Notepad. You can then edit the contents of that SVG. So for it to accept a fill color, for that to be modifiable, you for fill you enter parameter parenthesis fill, for example, and it defaults to black. And you can do the same for outline colors, outline width, fill, opacity, all the different variables. You can go in and enter into that SVG, and it doesn't have to be in any specific order as long as it's in that SVG file. Then you save it, and when you go back to QGIS, you'll then be able to change the colors for those. So let me just paste this into the chat so you have this link handy. Another thing to know about SVGs while we're on the topic is that if you go to the settings menu of QGIS, to options, go into, where is this? Yeah, the system tab of the general QGIS settings has an SVG path section. So you can go in here and you can specify where on your computer you want QGIS to pick up and read SVG symbols. And you'll see that here I'm using, this kind of gets into profiles too in QGIS. So I am using, it says teaching up here in brackets, and that's because I'm using a teaching profile, which I meant to clean out of all the things like the map icons. I must have added those during the last class and forgot to delete them. I try to use this profile so it's a little cleaner without any modifications with all the default QGIS settings. And things like Symbology are all stored in your profile. And the settings for where SVG files are stored is all part of your QGIS profile. And you can, most people, if they're not paying attention, will just be using a default profile. So if I go to settings, user profiles, I'll see all the different profiles that I have set up. There's my default profile, but I've set up, I'll set them up for workshops or for teaching and things like that. So you will want to pay attention to that. You may have a profile for a project that has a different set of SVG icons than your default profile, for example. So that's something that you can manage. So let me zoom in here a little bit, and where we have some airports, and I'm going to make these a little bit bigger so you can see them a little bit better. So we have these airports, and another useful symbology tool in QGIS, especially for points, are layer effects. So if I scroll down here, you'll see that I have this draw effects option down here. And if I choose draw effects, this little yellow star becomes active, and I can click on that to open up the draw effects panel. And the effects panel lets me do things like add a drop shadow to my symbology. So now I have a drop shadow under my SVG icons. So this can be useful to kind of help lift something that's important to the map off a busy base map. If you have an air photo, for example, as a background, these layer effects can be really useful at making something more visible against that busy background. And if I choose drop shadow, you can see I can customize how that is configured. So you can change the size of the shadow, how far it extends from the feature, make it more subtle, or a bigger shadow. You can control the blur radius, which is how smooth that shadow is. So you can kind of reduce that to get a sharper shadow, or increase it to get a fuzzier shadow. So you can control all those settings, including the color. Maybe you want the shadow to be a dark blue, for example. So all of that is configurable. And then maybe you don't want drop shadow, maybe you want an outer glow. So I could inspect an outer glow, which is going to give a little glow around my points. And that's another really useful technique for making something easier to see. And you can specify a lot of details about the outer glow. The default is a single color and it's white, but I could make this the same color by, I could go down here and choose pick color from my color dropdown, and I could click on the background of the map, and I could make the outer glow the same color as the background of the map. Or I could choose, a completely different, darker outer glow, and it almost looks like a drop shadow at that point. You can also use color ramps for those. And you can turn on multiple effects at the same time. So usually one is enough, but there's nothing stopping you from using multiple effects. And one interesting thing is if I just have a drop shadow turned on for these, you'll see there's this thing called source. And source is the symbology of the feature, the SVG symbol. So I can uncheck that, and then I'm left with just the shadow. And so that's also an option. And I don't think there's a lot of use cases for that, but sometimes you may accidentally uncheck source and wonder what happened. And there's also a longer list down here. So if I select inner glow, for example, I can choose this drop down list, and I can choose some of the others that are in here, like blur, which allows me to blur my features. It doesn't really work so well with SVG icons, but can work well for polygons and things like that. So there are, I don't know why this interface, it only allows you to have the source and then 4 others. And so if you want another one from the list, you have to choose one of these and go down to this list and choose one of the others in there and add it. Oh, that's a little funky. But great tools for making
You can
your...
use the plus icon.
Hmm?
You can use the plus icon also, so that you can
Yep,
fill it
exactly.
with the rest.
Yeah. So yeah, and it would be nice if they were just all there. So I could, add blur this way, and
Would this be something that is saved in the user profile?
These, if you have them added like this, would just get saved as part of the project.
Okay.
I don't think that would be saved in your profile.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a pretty heavy drop shadow. I usually like to make them a little more subtle than that. So they lift a little bit without, so if I turn this drop shadow off and on, you can see the effect of having that. And you can also do that for polygons. So if I turn on make the communa, the municipalities, the active layer, I can switch to that layer. And if I expand layer rendering down here, you'll see that draw effects option. And I can try a drop shadow for the municipalities. And it'll put a drop shadow under the polygon. And sometimes that can be a nice effect. So those are the layer effects. So the next thing we're going to do is look at categorical rendering, where we have categories of things. So I'm going to turn on this layer of places. So this is data that was obtained from OpenStreetMap, and it's basically just all the cities and villages named places. And so if I look at the attributes for places, we have the name, we have the region code, the region that it's in, and the municipality code, the municipality name. So I could use some of these to style these places with a little more information on the map instead of giving them all the same single symbol. I could choose something else. So I'm going to, where it says single symbol, I'm going to choose categorized. So this is an attribute-based renderer, and the categorized renderer is basically designed to go through an attribute field and find all the individual entries in there and make a unique symbol for each one of those. So if I choose region name, for example, I then have to click the classify button down here, and it will classify those points so that each region gets its own symbol. And you can go in and change those symbols. So if I want to change this symbol, for example, I can double click on it and change the color of that to something else like that. And so I could choose another field from here. I could choose the municipality name field and click classify. It's going to tell me that I'm changing the classification field, and it prompting me that I'm going to be deleting classes before it can do this. Let's see. Yes, and now I get a color for each individual municipality. So all the places have colors based on the municipality that they lie in. So it becomes a long list, and you'll see that in the table of contents as well. And this is always done by default with this random color ramp. And there's a nice trick with this. If you don't like the assortment of random colors, you can click the drop-down menu and choose Shuffle Random Colors and have it just change those. And sometimes after going through a few versions of this, you find a set of colors you like a little more than the first one. There's also an undo and redo button at the bottom of the layer styling panel, so I could go back to the previous set of colors using that. And whenever you're using one of the categorized or graduated renderers, this symbol button becomes what we call a master symbol button. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to change the outline or the size of each one of these, but you don't want to have to click on 99 categories here and change the outline of each one. So you can use this symbol button to do that. It kind of becomes a master symbol button. So I can click on that and then choose the simple marker component, and I can make a change that would go across all the categories. So for example, I could change the stroke color to white for all of those. And now all the symbols get an outline color of white. And I could make the outline a little thicker, for example. So you can always go in there and make changes to all the symbols at the same time. If I want to increase the size of all of them, I can do the same thing from here. And then click go back button, and I've adjusted all the symbols for the layer. Otherwise, you have to go in individually. If there's one particular category you wanted to change independent of the others, you would simply go and double click on that one and make the changes you want. The other similar renderer to this is the graduated renderer. So what I'm going to do to show that to you is I'm going to right click on places and duplicate the layer, just make another copy of it. And I'm going to rename this one just so that I can keep them straight. Whoops, no, I don't want to, that's the wrong thing. I'm going to call it places population. And I'm going to turn off the original one and turn this one on. And turn off airports. And here I'm going to change my renderer from categorized to graduated. So this renderer is similar, but it only works on numeric attributes. So this is where you're going to choose an attribute from your data that has numbers in it. So it's only going to show me columns in my data that have numbers. So I can choose population. And then I can choose a color ramp. And then click classify. And here it classifies my symbols by population. So you can see that it's broken these into 5 classes, but it's there's a lot of data in this layer that has a population of 0. So you're getting the first 2 classes are basically the same. It's not really showing us anything interesting. We have different modes down here. Equal count quantile is the default. So if I right click on this layer, I can choose show feature count. And it tells me I have 6,840 points in this layer. And you can see how many are falling into each category. So this mode, equal count, tries to put the same number of features into each category. But because of the way the data values are falling, it's not really able to do that with 5 classes. So you can go down and choose a different one. There's natural breaks. And so you can see there's a different dispersal of points with this one. Still kind of getting that white outline. So I'm going to go into the master symbol and change that outline to black so we can see the points. But you can choose which one of these works the best for your data. Sometimes you have a data set that's just kind of problematic where the array of values isn't terribly useful. And there's 2 modes for this graduated renderer. There's color that we're working with now, but I can also choose size, and I can change the size of the points based on population. So this is actually I think a better rendering of these data, where I'm seeing the bigger cities more prominently on the map and the small towns as small points, or at least the ones where there was no population data available. And so here you can choose the minimum size of the smallest point and the size of the biggest point. So you can adjust those. You can also, with any of these classification methods, choose more categories down here. So the default is 5, but I can break this up into more categories. So whenever you're doing this, the thing to keep in mind is you're trying to convey something on the map. And so you're using all these tools to try to get the convey some kind of message in the data to the audience. So that's why it takes some time sometimes to, because every data set is different and you have to figure out what tools render that the best for your purposes. So let's see, getting close to done with points here, but we're almost at the top of the hour. Let me show you one more thing on histograms, and then we'll take a break here at the top of the hour. So I'm going to turn this places population layer off, and I'm going to turn the airports back on. And I think I'll make another copy of this. I will duplicate it, and I'll call this airports altitude. Because one of the attribute columns we have for airports is the altitude of the airport. There it is, alt. We have the altitude in meters of each of these airports. And so I can render these data based on that altitude value. So since that's a numeric value, I would use the graduated renderer, which works against numeric attributes. I would choose the altitude field, change it to blues, and then click classify. And it's going to break this into SVG airplanes, and the color is the altitude of the airport. So I could click this symbol, and I could, instead of SVG marker now, I could go and I could just choose a normal simple marker and just choose points for this. So you can always go in and modify things like that. But if you've been working with something like an SVG marker and you go in and use another renderer, it's going to use that SVG symbol layer type for whatever you're doing. So we can also look at the histogram here. So next to the number of classes is this histogram. So I can tell QGIS to load the values for this. And it shows me how those class breaks are. These lines are where the QGIS broke the data into the individual classes. And down here, I'm seeing how many features are along the histogram of data values and how they get broken up into different classes. So this can be another really useful way to decide where you want those breaks to be between classes when you're rendering data like this. So for example, I might say, I'd like to move this so that all of those are encapsulated in that top category there. So you can use these sliders in the histogram to decide your own class breaks based on how you're seeing the distribution of values. So you come up with your own custom classification at that point. And so those values have been updated based on what I showed. And then another part of this, whenever you're working on one of these classifications, is that these are the data values where the class breaks are being made. So the top class is from 36 meters to 99 meters. But I could go in here to the legend column, and I could just type high for that, and I could type low for the others. So you can go and type anything in there that may be more meaningful to the map reader than just a series of numbers. For example, you can name the categories, and those will show up in the legend for your data. So you can always modify those sorts of legend values.
But will those legend descriptions, will they be overwritten if we select a new mode, or if we edit in the histogram?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question. If we go in here and we modify the histogram, I think they'll stay the same. Yeah, because we're just altering that. But if we go in and we choose a different mode, such as natural breaks, then they're going to go away because it's going to reclassify the data completely from scratch.
Could you go one step back?
Yes.
And what if you add another class?
So you can add another class, like with this plus button, and it will just add a blank class in here. And then you have to enter the values to tell QGIS what values that class incorporates. So that's one way you can. So maybe the data has changed since the last time you were in this project, and now there's an airport with an altitude that's out of the range of what we're showing here. And you could go in here and add that class to make that, go from 99 to 100, for example. And, have that class be 99 to 100, and we don't have any in there. So I'll remove that. The other thing you can do is go in here and just increase the number of classes. So I can make it 7 classes instead of 6. And every time you do this, it's going to reclassify the data. So those legend values will disappear because it's recomputing the classes based on your settings when you enter a new number of classes. So you could make it just 2, or you can put any number in here. You can also do things like start using color ramps that have more colors than a single color, and do things like that with when you start getting more than 7 classes. You can use a bi-directional color ramp that has, goes from green to red, so that you can distinguish all the differences in classes. That makes sense, Jesper? Did it answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
It does. Very nice. I have a follow-up question, if I might.
Yes.
What is the link class boundaries do?
So that basically links. So I can see class number 1 here goes from 1 to 3. Class number 2 goes from 3 to 5. So link class boundaries means that where this class ends, this one starts. So,
okay. So there are no jumps.
There's no jumps, there's no gaps. And you saw in the histogram, there may be gaps. There are gaps in here where you don't have any data values. But if you uncheck that, then it's not going to, and I click classify again, there's no guarantee that where this class ends, this one starts. There may be gaps between them. So that's what that does.
Can I add a question to that?
Mm-hmm.
What happens with 3, for example? It's not logical to me, because it's like with no, just go back.
Yeah.
If what is it called? Verdi Podensk. If Verdin is 3, does it go to the one class or to the other class? What
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
Like it doesn't seem to be logical, because it's like double.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So this will be less than or equal to 3 in the first class, and then I believe in the second class it'll be greater than 3. So if you have a class that has a value of 3, it's not going to be represented in both of these. It's going to be, one of these will be less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. Is that what you're asking?
But how can I? Yeah, exactly. But how can I get to know, if it's less than or equal?
Well, if you know your data,
how can I define it?
Well, these data are integers, for example. So I could put this class is, goes out to 0.1 to 5. And so I could define it that way. Or the other way that the other renderer you can use is up here. You can, if we switch to rule based, what it's going to do is tell you exactly the expressions being used. So you can see altitude is greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 3. And then you can see the second class is just greater than 3.
Yes, this answers my question more than the other, because here I can exactly know what it means. Which one is equal and less than, and so on.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yes.
So let's take a 10-minute break. I'll pause the recording. You can get some coffee and stretch your legs, and then we'll come back and we'll start working with a couple other point cluster renderers and move into lines.
So what time do we meet again?
We're going to come back, let's say 20 minutes after 4, or 20 minutes after 2. Yeah, 14:20. Okay, any questions come up during your break before we move on? No? Okay. So we've looked at graduated and categorized rendering. So what we're going to do next is look at renderers that are useful when we have points that are really tightly clustered. So this is archaeological sites across Denmark, pulled from OpenStreetMap. And there's a lot of points in here. If I right click on it and show feature count, there's almost 26,000 points in this layer. So obviously at this scale, they're all piling on top of one another and we can't see them all. But we have some renderers in QGIS so we can use to kind of show the magnitude of points that are stacked in one location. So for example, I can choose, which one's we're going to do first? Yeah, point cluster. This one called point cluster is easy to use. It's simply going to count all the points that are stacked at that zoom level and put a little number inside to show you what that looks like. So we can zoom in and we'll get a different rendering because as you zoom in, fewer points are stacked at that scale. And with this renderer, you can click on render settings here, and that would allow you to change the individual points. So perhaps I want to go in here and make these, I don't know, something that is a little brighter and stands out more on the map, something, I don't know, let's just make them green and make them a little bit bigger. So there's our archaeological points, and then I can go back. And then this cluster symbol is the symbol that is doing all the work. That's putting a big red circle with the label on it. So if I click on the cluster symbol, I can go in and edit that. And you can see that there are 2 symbol layer types here. One is a simple marker of size 4 with this red color. Then on top of that, there's a font marker. So a font marker is another symbol layer type for points. And the font marker is being used. And there's something that I get into quite a bit more in the advanced data visualization class that I teach, which is the kind of the next one after this. But these little items on the right-hand side of all these parameters are data-defined overrides. And there's a lot you can do with these. They're, for the most part, kind of beyond the scope of this course, but you can see for the character part of the font marker, if I hover over this, it's using cluster size. It's using an expression. So I can go on here and choose edit, and it'll bring up the expression builder. And it's using this variable called cluster size to count the number of points that are there. It's just a built-in function in QGIS, cluster size. And that's what it's using to label each one of these. So I can make any changes to the cluster symbol that I want. I can make it, a green color, similar to the other points. I can increase the size if I want. And for the font marker, I can change the font any way I want. I can choose specific fonts. I can choose the size of the font, specify whether it's, if I have that for a particular font, I can choose regular or italic or anything like that. So you can change that font any way you want. So that's another interesting symbol layer type in QGIS, and it's built into this cluster renderer. So that's point cluster. The other one I'm going to show you, turn off archaeology, has to do with places. So I'm going to duplicate places again. This is a good layer to show this heat map renderer I'm going to use next. I'm going to rename this heat map. And I'm going to just put this back to a single symbol renderer of all the points. And I'm going to change the renderer from single symbol to heat map. We just looked at point cluster, and now we're looking at heat map. So heat map renders those points as a heat map, and the default is this black to white color ramp. But I can change the color ramp. So for example, red, yellow, green. And I can, whenever you have a color ramp, sometimes it's, this is showing the concentrations of points in green, and I think I'd rather have them in red. So I can click on this color ramp and tell QGIS to invert it, to flip it around. So that now the clusters are in red. And then you can adjust the settings for the heat map renderer. You can specify the radius that QGIS is looking from a given point to find other points in its neighborhood. So I could increase this from 10 to 20, and QGIS is going to look across a broader part of the landscape to find points. Back to 10. You can also use this rendering quality. So basically, if I put it on fastest, it's going to become a coarser map where you can kind of see the pixels. And if I make it the best quality, it's going to take longer, and it's going to be a much finer resulting rendering of the data. Basically, it's rendering it as a raster heat map. And so when you use the best quality, it takes longer, but it's much smoother. And this kind of gets into, maybe we want a base map here. So, in Denmark, we have the Danes in the class probably are familiar with data forsooning. And so I could choose, this is a local plugin that we have in Denmark for adding different Danish data sets, and it comes with a couple base maps. So I could add a base map to this and move it to the bottom of my map. And then I could make my heat map semi-transparent. So I could expand this layer rendering section. This is always collapsed. You always have to click the little arrow to expand it. And that's where draw effects will often be, that we looked at earlier this afternoon. But I can use the opacity slider to make this layer semi-transparent so that I can see the base map through it. Another really nice plugin for accessing base maps is open or quick map services rather. So if I search in here for quick in the plugins manager, I can find quick map services. I already have it installed. I'm just going to turn it on. And quick map services will show up under the web menu. And it has a whole series of base maps that you can add. For example, OpenStreetMap. Or Google Road, Google Satellite. So that's another useful base map plugin that you can use. And then, of course, if you go to the browser panel, if you're not aware, there are these things called XYZ tile services. And QGIS now ships with an OpenStreetMap XYZ tile service and the MapZen global terrain. So you can always, these are always available. You can always add one of these services to your map and use that as a base map as well. So you have, there's several choices for working with different base maps in QGIS. So going back to this renderer, you can also weight the heat map by an attribute. So here we have places or cities. So they also have a population attribute. So I could weight the heat map by the population. And that's really going to identify the big cities in Denmark, Copenhagen, Aalborg, Aarhus. And if I increase the search radius, we get a better rendering of that, maybe not. So that's the heat map renderer. So both that and the point cluster are really useful for working with data like this. And so for me, this is interesting because there are processing algorithms in QGIS for interpolating a raster surface from points, a density surface. But this is just a renderer that you can really quickly use to render the points like that. So it's really handy. So we're going to move on to looking at lines. Was there a question there?
Yes, I have a
Yes.
question. So, so the visual representation is now, if there's next to none or none places, the map becomes green.
Yeah, I'm using a color ramp that goes from red to green.
Yeah.
So
Would it be possible to filter out the lower values? So, for instance, in this case, our sea would still be the color of the sea from the base map.
yes, there is you could do that. So this is I was going to show you this later, but it's a good time as any. So I'm going to basically make a duplicate of the municipality boundaries. I'm going to call it inverted polygon shape burst fill, which is a lot. I know that's it. So I have a version of the municipalities now. And another very interesting renderer that you have in QGIS for polygons is inverted polygons. So this will basically make it the opposite of the municipalities. In other words, it makes it the sea. And I can then combine that with, instead of a simple fill, a shape burst fill. And I can choose, let's see, like a dark blue and a light blue as my two colors. And I'm going to choose under shading style. Whole shape isn't going to work for this. I want to choose this next option, set distance. And I may want to decrease that a little bit. And then The blur, so the set distance is basically how far from the polygon edge that color 1 merges into color 2. And I can set this distance to what I like. And then the blur strength controls how smoothly color 1 blends into color 2. And so I can increase the blur strength to make that a smoother effect between the 2 colors. And I've basically created a mask around Denmark so that I only get the heat map underneath it now. So I could, put this back to, I could remove the weighted points and put this back to the default of a search radius of 10. And so I have my heat map now masked out by just kind of seeing the sea beyond it. So that's one use of an inverted polygon shape burst fill. So what I love about this is that you, and this is a little too dark of a blue, I think, for this. You probably want something more like that. So you can spend some time choosing your colors and all of that, but you get a really nice representation of the sea without having any data for it. You're just inverting the municipalities. Is that kind of what you were thinking of, Jesper? Not exactly, but kind of.
Yeah, not exactly, but kind of. But I was just wondering if you could use the heat map so that the lower values would not appear. But so I understand the values of using this setting instead.
Yeah.
Also because if everything depends on the value in the color ramp, so if they are spread out far, then perhaps they won't be transparent in the sea as well or whatnot. I don't know. I can.
Yeah. So
you could
unfortunately, this renderer doesn't have.
You could create your own color ramp with a lower value as transparent.
Yeah.
If you use, for example, black or something, then you can maybe use the blend mode in the layer rendering.
Yeah, it's possible.
Then you can multiply or something, and then I think the black, what is black, you won't see. So, or white, one of those two.
Yeah, so you could go in and you could work with edit the color ramp. So what I did just there was double click on the color ramp and it opens up this color ramp editor, and you could design a color ramp that maybe instead of going from, like you said, from were you suggesting it goes from black to red instead of green to red, or
yeah.
So we could choose the first color as black and take out a couple of these stops and end up with a color ramp like this, and then click OK. And then maybe we could use the
layer rendering.
Yeah.
The blending mode or so. It had to be white, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if that'll work with this, but but it's always worth trying. But the unfortunately, this renderer does not have the controls to eliminate values, because it's basically going out to it's using the whole map canvas, and it's just searching for points across the whole map canvas. There's no setting in here to restrict it to just a certain area of the map, for example. So there is no way to, or there's no way to filter out. You can specify a maximum value, but not a minimum value. It's just not set up to do that.
It's based on my screen, the area of my screen. So if I zoom in somewhere, it will change the colors. Like if you zoom in on the north of Zealand, yeah, exactly. It will change, because it's dependent on what is represented of in the map.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, good. We are learning stuff. Woohoo.
Yeah. So in the processing toolbox, there are interpolation tools, which is what this is. So there are tools here for generating a raster layer from points like this, where you have a little more control over the extent and all of that. But here we're just looking at a quick visualization tool instead of a processing tool. So yeah, sometimes this helps to understand data better, to understand where the hotspots are in a data set. And sometimes it helps to show people that, and sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of, like all these tools, they kind of depend on your data and your project. But yeah, the renderer is fairly simple and only has a couple controls in it. But it did get to introduce inverted polygon shape burst fills, which we'll look at here in a little bit as well, because that's another interesting renderer. So we're going to switch to lines. So we have a layer here. Let me clean up my layers panel. We're going to turn on the cycling routes. So these are cycling routes, again, are from OpenStreetMap. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to make the borders of my municipalities white, just so they aren't so noisy on the map. We can focus on the cycling routes. So the cycling routes, there's information in here on which network it's part of. Is it part of the local, the regional, or the national cycling network? And so we can use the categorize renderer to symbolize these into different categories. So I'm going to switch to categorized, and for the value, I'm going to choose the network field. And I'll click classify. And it breaks them into these different categories. LCN is a local network, NCN is a national network, RCN is a regional network, ICN is international. I'm not sure what IWN is. And you'll notice whenever you do one of these classifying renderers in QGIS, it's always going to add this null category in case there are values in there that don't have data in that network field or whatever field you're using. So you may or may not want this. It may or may not be important to have those represented on the map. But here, if I don't want it, I can select it, and I can either just turn it off, or I can remove it so that I don't have that category on my map. So what I'm going to do is, let me see. I'm going to go into the master symbol button here, and I'm going to use this for lines to make changes to all the lines at the same time. So I'm going to make them a thicker line, 0.8, and then I can go back, and I'm going to choose a nice set of colors for these that is a little better than these. I'm going to choose for the local cycling networks a nice blue color. Maybe a little darker. There we go. And then for the national network, I will change that to red. And for the regional network, I'll make those green. Okay, so I have those here, and I can also reorder these. So let's say I want the national to be up here, followed by the local, and the regional go in between. And I'll turn off these other two. So I just have national, regional, and local turned on. And again, just like when I was making the map of populations or altitudes for airports, I can go in here and I can type in national as my legend, regional, and local. Like that. And so I have my 3 main networks here. And then what I can do is, I was going to show you the hatched kind of a, well, we can start adding other symbol layer types to this to make a more complicated symbol. So for the local networks, for example, I can double click on this and I have my simple line. Maybe I want it to be a little thicker. And so I have my simple line. And what I can do up here is click the green plus button to add another symbol layer type. So this is another simple line, which is fine, but I'm going to change the color to white. And then I'm going to make this, instead of a solid line, a dot line. And I'll make it a little bit thicker. So now if I zoom in, you can see we have a nice symbol for those. You can always go in and adjust thicknesses and things so it's easier to see on the screen, especially. But we have a nice line with the white dashed on top of it. And for a dot line like that, you can use custom dash patterns here. So you could check this and you could go in and you could identify how long the dash and how long the space is. You always have that option. And you can also choose this align dash pattern to line length. And this is a kind of a new setting that basically lets you, I don't know how well you can see this on your screen, but as I check that and uncheck that, it's going to kind of adjust the dashes so they may look a little better. You can also have it tweak the dash pattern at sharp corners. So sometimes these settings just make for a nicer looking hashed symbol. And so I can go and I can repeat that for the regional network. I made this a little wider, and I'm going to add another symbol layer type, make it white, increase the thickness, and make it a dot line for those. And this, maybe this has to be a little darker for that to work. I'll make it. There we go. And then for the national, repeat that. Okay, so I have my different cycling networks with their hashed line symbol there. So another thing that you can do with these symbols sometimes, I know with this data, there are places where one network is stacked on top of another. In other words, a cycling trail may be part of the national network and part of the regional network. And so there's one line on top of the other. And if you want to prioritize these, so you see the national network on top of the regional, etc., you can go down to this advanced button and you can enable what's called symbol levels down here. So if I choose symbol levels and I check enable symbol levels, this tells QGIS what order to render those lines in. So for example, we have 2 symbols for each one. We have the thick colored line and the dashed line on top. So that's why we have layer 0 and layer 1 for each one. And so if I want the national line to be drawn on top, I can give that the highest number. So it'll be drawn last. So both these symbols would be drawn as number 1, or number 2 rather. These will be number 1. And I can call this 0 and 0. So this tells QGIS the one with the 0 will be drawn first. The one with the number 1s will be drawn second. And then it'll draw these. So it'll make sure that the national is on top of the regional, which is on top of the local. And you can do that just by putting in the numbers for the symbols from 0 to X. So now I'm getting a different map with, I'm able to see the national network on top of all the others. Whereas before, if I turned off symbol levels, you can see it changes the map. So sometimes that's nice to make sure that this is kind of like a mini version of the layers panel. And when you go into symbol levels, you get to tell QGIS what order the symbols should be drawn in, just like you can control which order the layers are drawn in. That's really, I think, the best way to think about it. So that's a little trick. And then the other line layer we have in here, we have one for railroad lines. And so we turn this layer on, and there is so this section down here, when I just have the main line component selected here, this is like a mini version of the style manager that we're going to look at the end of the class. And so QGIS does ship with some symbols. And some of these are kind of, silly, like the cat trail. But there is one in here called Topo Railway. So this is a nice one we can use. And this uses what's called a marker line. So you can see when I chose that, it has a symbol layer type of marker line with a simple line underneath. So the simple line underneath is the main line. And whenever you have these, so I have 2 symbol layer types, I could highlight this one, and down here where it says enable symbol layer, I could turn that off so it's only showing the main lines. So whenever you have more than one of these symbol layer types for a layer, you can turn one off, or you can even remove it if you want to. And so for this marker line, it is basically a short hashed line, and you can see that there are all these different settings. This is using the default width interval, so it's going to put one of those horizontal little tick marks every 3 millimeters. But there's other settings in here, so you could choose, on central point. And if you choose different settings in here, it's going to come up with very different placements of those. So you can choose what's most appropriate. You can increase the width interval to have them be, farther apart. And I've noticed with this that you'll kind of get areas where they look very dense because there's kind of a curve to the line. But one thing I've noticed is when you create a print composition and you export the map, they look better than they do on the map canvas. So you can also go down to the simple marker piece of this marker line, and that's where you can control the symbol for that crosshatch. So you can control the length of it, so you can make them thinner so they don't stick out as far from the main line, or you can make them longer, you can make them thicker, you can change their color. So you could make them, a dark gray instead of black. So all of those different settings are there for the simple marker for those cross marker lines. So that's railroads. And we could have done that ourselves just by adding to the simple line another symbol layer type and making it marker line. But the fact that QGIS has that symbol down here for us to use already makes it easy to add Topo Railway and then adjust it as you want to. So now that we have this, the railroad turned on, we also have train stations. So here we have points for all the different train stations. So I can I'll make those a brighter color so you can see them. And if I click on these, the identify tool, identify features, you can see that there's a system attribute, so I can see which Danish line these are part of. Some of these are STO stations, and some of these I think are local train lines. And so we could give these different symbols by the lines, and this gives me a chance to show you a couple more point renderers. So the first thing is we need to use the categorize renderer so that we come up with a different symbol for each network of train stations. So I can use categorized and choose that network or system field, as it was called, and click classify. And so we have STO, regional, metro, local. And so we can look at a couple different point renderers. So for the STO stations, if I double click on that, instead of a simple marker, I can go down here to the symbol layer types and choose a raster image marker. So this lets me choose a raster image for the point. And in your course data, we have the icon for these STO stations. We can put that in there, and then we can just increase the size so that we now have the Danish STO symbol on the map for those lines. And that's the raster image marker. And all I did was change the size for those. You also have rotation and some other settings. And then there's the local train lines here on this little line. And so we don't have an image for those, but we saw with the cluster renderer that there's a font marker. So I could first make this simple marker a square. I'll make it, maybe have like a gold color and make it a little bigger. So it kind of matches the size of the others. And then I could add another symbol layer type and make this one that font marker that was used with the cluster renderer. So when I use the font renderer, I can choose what I want the character to be. So here I'm going to put in an L for local, and I'm going to change the color of it to black. Why is it? Today. I'm just looking at my notes because I had a nice setting for this. I want to remember. Yep. So you can choose the font for this, and so I'm going to choose just Arial. So I get the L showing up, and then I can just increase the size of the font. So I'm just having an L for local, and you can see that it's not really following in the middle of my simple marker square. So this is where I could use the offset, and I could just change the Y setting a little bit to center that L in the square just by adjusting the Y offset for the font marker. Now I have a symbol for those as well. And I could do something similar for the Copenhagen metro stations with an M in a different color. So I end up with an icon for each one. So that's another option you get with points. Any questions on that? Okay, let's we're going to switch to polygons.
I have one, sorry.
Yep.
So we have in Denmark, we have the S stations, that's both one on Nørrebro station, and there's also a metro station on Nørrebro. So I
Yeah.
just checked the data, and apparently there are 2 train stations on Nørrebro station.
Yeah.
So how would I make sure that both stations are shown on my map?
Ah, good question.
Thank
So
you.
let's see.
Would it be a cluster, something? Displace? Oh,
no.
place setting?
Yeah,
Display.
it might just be let me think about it for a second. I'm turning on a Danish plugin called GeoSearch Deco, and I'm going to search for Nordport so I can zoom to it.
So it only searches for streets or what?
No, I think that's this this plugin will search for
Oh,
all
yes.
Danish place names. But okay, there we go. So it's right there. Yeah, I thought that was the one. So there's the 2 points, the Esto and the Metro.
Sadly, it's not a metro in the data.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I was just fiddling with this to kind of come up with something to use for the class. I didn't finish attributing everything correctly. Because you can't, this data is, I haven't found a place where you can easily access this data with all those kind of attributes. So I made it up myself.
It's very nice made up, because I've been looking for the Esto for some time.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. Okay, so I changed that to Metro. So one thing I could right click on this and copy this local code symbol and right click on Metro and paste it. That's another little trick. And I can go in here and I can just going to change the color to something else. So it won't take long. And I'll go down here and change the character to M. Oh, come on. Why didn't you switch to green? There you go. And you should be black. Okay. So there's the 2 stations now properly symbolized. And if you're zoomed in at a certain scale, they look fine. But yeah, as you zoom out, they just get stacked on top of one another. This can get a little tricky. This might be a situation where you have to since we're using with the Esto, we might have to go in here, and I don't think there's any simple way other than tweaking it so that it kind of move them. You know, I can use these offsets to move them, but then I'm moving all of them. I'm gonna have to think about this, and maybe this is something. So just to remind everyone, next Monday we have a follow-up session, and I'll think about this and see if we can work on present a solution to this on Monday during our follow-up session. So I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this and not get through all the material that we want to get through. But it's a great question. These are the kind of little details that take a lot of time when you're trying to put together a nice map. So let's switch to polygons and we're going to look at lakes. So I'm going to turn off the train lines, clean up my map a little bit. While we're at it, I want to show you, one thing we're going to talk about is loading and managing styles. And so one time it is useful to open up layer properties for a layer is for loading a style. So I'm going to open up layer properties for the municipalities. And if you go to the Symbology tab of layer properties, there's a style dropdown, and here you can save a style or load a style. And so if you do either one of these, you're usually working with a QGIS style called a QML file, which stores symbology. So I'm going to browse to our course data, and there is a Comuna QML file that has symbology stored in it. So I can choose that QML file and choose load style, and it will load that style in my data. And then I can go in and maybe I'll reduce the border thickness a little bit. We have a nicely symbolized Comuna boundaries now. And that's one way to load a style. So this is a technique that's useful if you want to share your data with a colleague or a customer. If you come up with a nice styling for a layer, you can go into the layer properties for that layer and go to the Symbology tab and save style. And it will bring up this window where you can save this out as a QML style file, and then you can give them that style and they can load it. So that's one easy way to share styles, especially if they're complicated styles, because any kind of rendering that you do will go into that QML file. But now we're going to focus on lakes. So I'm going to zoom to, let me see. I'm going to go here. Just north of Copenhagen, where we have some lakes here. And with lakes, of course, I even think there may be a style that ships with QGIS. No, I guess topo water. So I could just simply give them that topo water style that comes with QGIS and make them blue, and maybe change the color blue. But we can do quite a bit better than that with the shape burst fill. So I can choose the shape burst fill, which I used earlier with that inverted polygon shape burst fill. Here we're not using it with inverted polygons, we're just using the straight shape burst fill symbol layer type. And we can choose our two colors. So you can choose any two colors of blue, design them yourself. And you may want it to be from a dark blue to a light blue, or even in this case, blue to white. Any choice you'd like there. And then with lakes, usually choosing the set distance is nice, and then adjusting the blur strength to get a smoother transition. And then suddenly we get a really nice rendering of lakes. And the one thing we can do to enhance this a little bit is give a boundary to these lake symbols. So that would be done by adding another symbol layer type. And instead of it being a simple fill, we're going to make it an outline, simple line. So outline, simple line, and then I'm just going to give it a dark blue color. And now we have lakes with a little bit of a boundary around them with the shape burst fill in the middle. And you can choose if you want the dark color to be near the coastline or in the middle. There's different schools of thought on that. I could go in here and I could switch this around so you can see what it looks like going the other direction. Some people have different preferences on which way they like to go with that. Even though it's more intuitive to have the the deeper water be the darker color. A lot of people prefer the look of having the darker color near the edge of the lake. So you can decide what you think is best. So another polygon layer we have here is forests. So these are forest polygons, and there's complicated land ownership around here, so they have odd shapes. But if we want these to be something that really automatically resembles forests, we could certainly make them green as a start. I'm going to copy a color for these. So we can make them a nice green, and that's certainly a start to making them something that people would recognize as a forest on a map. But we can do better than that. We can add another symbol layer type to this, and we can make it a point pattern fill. And this will fill the polygons with some kind of point icon. And we have controls over how dense those will be. But one thing we can do right away, instead of just using a simple marker, we can make this an SVG marker. So you can see how you can start building with these different symbol layer types to create nicer effects. And so for this, we're going to choose a nice tree. Choose a tree icon. That should be fine. And I'm going to change the color to this to a darker green and increase the size. And now I have some tree icons within my forest. So that's nicer than the red point. And then I can switch back to this point pattern fill and start to adjust the density and dispersion of these points. So I can reduce the size of the horizontal and vertical distance between them to make them denser. And then there's this section down here on randomized pattern, and I can start adjusting these sliders, and you can see that now horizontally it's starting to randomize those icons within the forest, and it makes it a little more organic looking, a little more natural. There's also settings in here for the alignment, if you want to align them to the feature or to the map extent. This has to do with when you have, if you had like adjoining polygons, which we don't really have any of here, you might want the point pattern feature to cross the boundary. So you can use align pattern to map extent to get that effect. And there's a clipping setting down here to decide how those interact with the edge of the polygons. So maybe you want no clipping and they start falling outside the polygon itself, or clip to shape so they all fall neatly within the polygon. Make them a little denser. So this is a nice way to use this point pattern fill to create a nice rendering of forests. And there's another one. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this random marker fill. I'll call it random forests. Turn the copy on. And here we use point pattern fill, but there's also random marker fill. So random marker fill, in some cases even better. We don't have to adjust the horizontal displacement to make it more natural. It automatically is a little more natural, and we can just adjust the method to density based count. And maybe we want to reduce the size of the trees a little bit. And we get a nice rendering for forests. So either one of these is nice, either the point pattern fill or the random marker fill.
I'm sorry, what did you do?
Yeah, sorry if I went too fast. So for
With the-
random forest, I duplicated the first one, which
Yes.
is using point pattern. And so I selected point pattern fill and I just switched it to this random marker. And it
But so the
immediately makes
count
them,
mode, what is the count mode? It is density-based count.
yeah, so these are just two different modes for this renderer. Density based kind of puts the same density of trees in every polygon. So it'll put fewer trees in a smaller polygon and more trees in a bigger polygon.
Okay,
Absolute count puts the same number in every polygon. So here it's putting 10 in every polygon. So for a small forest, you get 10 trees, but you still get the same 10 trees in a bigger forest.
okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm. Lot of little settings. So before, when I showed you the inverted polygon shape burst fill for the coast, that is one really useful way to use that inverted polygon shape burst fill. Another is you may have a study area. So let's go to a bigger part of Denmark. Let's go to Jylland here, and let's say, you know, we have a study area in here somewhere. So I'm just going to go to layer, create layer. I'm going to create just a temporary scratch layer just to illustrate this. I'm going to call this study area. And I'll make it a polygon. And I'll put it into the local UTM coordinate system. And I'll click OK. So here's our study area polygon. And I'm just going to digitize a box where it's making a circle. Well, that's cool. So there's our study area, and we can use that same technique to with inverted polygon shape burst fill to put a nice mask around our study area. So I'm going to quickly show you this again. So I'm going to choose the inverted polygon renderer, put some mask around it. And then I'm going to choose the shape burst fill symbol layer type. And then I'm going to choose, you know, like a dark gray and white as my two colors. And I'm going to again use that same set distance method. Maybe increase the blur strength. And I can adjust the set distance. And so now I just see what's in my study area. But if I expand layer rendering, I can knock down the opacity of this inverted polygon shape burst fill. And now my study area kind of pops off the map. I get all the detail kind of being highlighted in my study area, but I can still get some of the context around it. And it creates a really nice effect. I love this technique. And it can be really useful to, you know, make your map stand out a little bit more. And it's then simply a matter of just adjusting the shape burst fill to decide how big of a big of a kind of a shadow effect that it creates is there, and fine tune the colors. But it's very quick to do once you have done it once or twice. I'm thinking about where to go next. I think what I'm going to do now is switch to some raster data, and we're going to look at styling some elevation rasters in QGIS. So I'm going to turn off these forests, and I can leave the lakes on. And I'm going to switch to the browser panel, and I'm going to go into the elevation folder. And I'm going to add the this two-strip digital surface model to QGIS. So this just covers a small area. And so there it is. And I'm going to drag the lakes on top of it because that will be nice. So this is a digital surface model. And so what that means is that it includes it's created from LiDAR. And so it includes trees, bridges, buildings, fences, all the built infrastructure is in here. And there's another kind of elevation data product called a digital terrain model, which is what we call bare earth, where all that is stripped off and it's just the surface of the earth. And with both of these, we can use some of the renderers QGIS has for elevation data. And so by default, this raster data set gets styled on a color ramp from light gray or white to black, basically, where black is the lowest area and white is the highest area in this region. So that's called a single band gray rendering, and that's the default for raster data. So I'm going to switch this to hillshade. And it gets interesting immediately. Let me turn off the lake for a minute. And if I zoom in to part of the map, down here, for example, you in this data set, since the digital surface model, see all the buildings, the trees, and everything else that's there. So it's fantastic data. This has a 40 centimeter resolution, so you get quite a bit of detail in it.
Can I ask a question?
Hmm?
I'm not really used to working with raster data. So
Okay.
in my perspective, raster means picture, but raster data is really not just a picture, is it?
No, it isn't. That's a good point. So raster, there's kind of two main data models: vector, point line and polygon, and raster. And raster is an array of cells. And so here, each cell is 40 centimeters on a side. So we call that high resolution because it's quite detailed. And the raster data has a whole variety of forms. So that would include aerial photography, satellite imagery, elevation data like this. And so here, every pixel in this, every cell in this data set just has one attribute. It has the elevation above sea level.
Okay.
And this renderer in QGIS is designed to create what's called a hillshade, which shows it as the kind of natural terrain that you're kind of look at seeing when you're out in the world, so that you can kind of see the shadows across the terrain. So it takes it.
Each pixel has some value that QGIS renders. Okay.
Yeah.
So that thank you.
Yep. And so if we were to zoom into this really closely, you'll begin. Let's see. You can zoom into the point where you're just seeing the pixels. And so this hillshade renderer, it does quite a bit. It allows you to determine which direction the sun is facing, the altitude of the sun, because it creates all these shadows on the landscape. And this is all data that you can, in Denmark, this is available through the Data for Suning plugin or from, the Data for Suning website. So it's freely available data that can be added to anything quite easily in Denmark. And this kind of data is available all over the world, regardless. And so we have this nice hillshade rendering. And if we zoom in to this, you get a lot of texture, but you'll start seeing some, I don't know if you can see, there's kind of like you're seeing some gridding, like straight lines cutting across the data. And so when you're doing this, it's really useful to change this resampling method to bilinear, and it will basically smooth the data out so that you're removing some of those visual artifacts from the way it's being rendered. But you can see where there's ponds and trees and hedges. It's quite nice. So next, what we can do is right click on this and duplicate it. And I'm going to call this one colored DSM. I'm going to turn off this first one. So since this is the same data, it's still, I just made a copy of it. It's still using the Hillshade renderer, but I can change this to single band pseudo color. And it's going to give my elevation data colors. Instead of being black to white, it's giving it colors. And here I can click the drop down and choose create new color ramp. Because there are no color ramps in here that are really designed for terrain. So I'm going to show you a nice little trick with color ramps. I'm going to choose create new color ramp, and I get this color ramp selector. And here I can choose this catalog of color ramps that comes with QGIS, but it's kind of hidden. Catalog CPT City. If I click OK, and it's going to open up a window that has a bunch of color ramps that I can choose from by type. So here's this catalog of color ramps, and there's in here by varying types. There's precipitation, temperature, and here's topography. And so there's quite a few here that are designed for terrain. So I'm going to choose SDA. I kind of like this one, and I'll click OK and click the classify button. And now my terrain is classified kind of in earth tones from the lowest elevation to the highest elevation. And another trick, kind of heading towards managing styles, if this is a color ramp that I would just like to use again, I can click the drop down here, and I can tell QGIS to save this color ramp. And in QGIS now, you can have this be a project style, but if I want it to be available in all my projects, I would choose default instead of project. And I can name this, it was called SDA. I'll call it SDA terrain. And then I can give it a tag. I could come up with my own tag, or let's call it terrain. And if I click add to favorites, it's going to show up in this first list of color ramps in this menu. So I'm going to click add to favorites. And click save. And now when I click this color ramp dropdown, you'll see that in this list. And I don't have to go through that whole process again. I can just use it. Okay, so I'm going to turn this layer on above it. And this layer is blocking the colored one. So I'm going to use this thing called a blending mode, and a blending mode of multiply, and this creates a color hillshade effect. So now we get a little more information. We get all the nice relief, but we also get the detail and the colors in there. And these blending modes are fantastic. I have a slide in here on these. These are standard algorithms that are in most graphic software, but QGIS was the first GIS to incorporate them, and they've been in there for quite a few years now. And they come in different groups. There's a lighten group, the darken group, the contrast group, and this inversion and cancellation. So these, again, there's Wikipedia pages that have all the algorithms that these use. So they're standard. This multiply one that we just used is probably the most commonly used one in QGIS, and this is probably the most common reason to use it. But I'm going to show you now a reason to use these overlay and soft light, which can also be nice. So we can take this one step further. I can now add this other file in here, this 2-strip DTM, which is a terrain model. So this is different than the DSM because it's just the bare earth. So for example, if I use that hillshade renderer with this and toggle it off and on, you see it doesn't include all those buildings and trees, just the surface of the earth. I'm going to use this one to create contours for my map. So I'm going to switch this from hillshade to contours. And the default contour interval of 100 meters and 500 meters is a little too big for Denmark. So I'm going to make the contour interval 2 and the index contour interval 10. So you can see I now have contour lines showing up on my map. Index contours are always 5 times the index contour, and they just help the map reader gauge the thickness of slopes. So I'm going to make the index contour symbol a little thicker, bump it up to 0.86 maybe. So you can see the index contours every 5 lines. And so now we have a nice little visualization of the terrain. And so if I zoom out, they get to be a little busy. They kind of start dominating the map. So I can soften these contours a little bit by using another blending mode. I can choose the overlay or soft light blending mode, which softens them into the colors of the map a little bit. And if we do that combined with our shape verse fill lakes, we start getting a pretty nice visualization of the terrain in this area. Any questions on that?
Is it possible to extract the contours to vector?
No,
No.
it's just a rendering, just kind of like that heat map tool.
Okay.
But there is a contour tool in the processing toolbox. So if you search the toolbox for contour in the GDAL section, you'll find this contour tool, and I could use this to generate contours as a vector layer. And then use your line styling tricks that you now know to make them look nice. You could use the same blending modes with those that you did with this.
Okay. Yes. Thanks.
Since the raster layers have data in them, would it be possible to display the altitude for each, no, not each, but as a text on the map, like a label, based on the raster image?
No, no, it isn't possible to label that. But there are tools in the processing toolbox for like intersecting points with a raster so that the altitude of each point gets added as an attribute.
Okay.
You could do something like that. The altitude is displayed in the legend from 95 to 6 here. So you could add that to a map legend so that you knew what the range of colors means generally. And then if you generated contours like we were just discussing, you could then label those contour lines with the elevation so that you knew exactly what the elevation of the contour lines was. Okay. Which brings us to labels. So let's look at the municipal boundaries. So if we want to label these, we've been working with the Symbology tab of layer styling. And so here we would switch to labels, which is the tab below. And by default, it says no labels. And I would simply choose single labels. And then I could choose the field that I wanted to use. So here it shows well for me. It shows municipality name. So I see the names appearing on the map. So then you have a lot of tools for labels. You have on this first tab, the text tab, you can choose the font, the style, the size, the color. So you could do all sorts of things. I could maybe make it a brown color to match the color I have of the municipal boundaries. And there's a lot of placement options in here. So I could go into this placement tab off to the right and choose different modes for placement of these labels, such as maybe around centroid. And you'll see the labels shift a little bit. Free, which will make them kind of use the direction of the polygon to fit the label in there. So there's a lot of different options here. I'll switch to use horizontal. So you have some options there. You also have options on this tab to the right, which is rendering, to set these so that they only draw them if they fit completely within the feature. So this was checked. If I uncheck that, you'll see that there's a lot of tiny little polygons that are part of some of these municipalities. And now QGIS will try to put a label on each one of those, and it gets kind of overwhelming. So it's really nice to have this box checked, only draw labels which fit completely within the feature, which eliminates a lot of that noise. Okay, so we have that, and there's no matter how many of those settings you set, sometimes you need to manually place labels as well. Another thing you can do, so you can see some of these municipalities have a dash in the name. This second tab here, formatting, lets you choose a wrap-on character. So if I put a dash in here, it will move anything after that dash to the second line. So now it's wrapping the label based on the dash character. So that can help them fit within their polygon as well. But sometimes you need to manually move them. And this is a municipality. I don't know why that is showing up that way. That's strange. I found some issues with this municipal boundaries layer from GeoDeco. It has some holes around the boundaries and things. It has some geometry errors. But anyway, so we have our labels looking pretty nice, but we may want to move some of them. So we can use this labeling tool. This is a toolbar for labels right here. And there's a tool on it here, move a label, diagram, or call out. And we can use this to move a label exactly where we want it to go. So maybe we want a couple of these to be out in the sea and have a call out line. So for example, we can go to this tab for call outs and check that. And now go and move this label out into the sea. Oh, sorry. I had already. Oh, here we go. Went on to the other monitor. When you first go to move a label in QGIS, it's going to ask you for the primary key for that layer, which is just the ID. And if you're storing your data in a geo package like this, you can just take the default FID. It just needs to know the ID of each feature. So I can use that, and I can use this to drag a label and move it to a new location. And these settings are stored in the project. And if I use a call out line, I can even grab the end of the line and move that to a specific location. Come on, QGIS. Oh, is it? I think that's simply because I've been doing something before class, so you shouldn't run into that. So you can really adjust these labels and call out lines quite well. And this is good if you're going to be more zoomed out to a place where the label wouldn't fit in the polygon. We still have the municipality labeled in that case, and it would work well for municipalities that lie in the center of others. So those are some of the tools you can use to format labels, and it's the same if you want to label places, for example, or points or lines. So the settings are very much the same.
Can you adjust the line styles?
Yes,
So,
for this call out, you can choose different styles of call outs. So you can choose just a straight line like that, or whoops.
Oh yeah.
Or these things called Manhattan lines, which have right angles to them, or balloons, which would be a kind of a, let's see what it does here. Yeah, it's kind of balloons. There, okay. So you have a number of choices for the style, and then for the line itself, it's just a line symbol. So you can go into line symbol, and at that point you're in line symbology, and you can choose any line you want. You know,
Yeah, so you can place a dot on the point where it is situated on the end of the line. You can.
Yeah. So
add a dot or
were you
something.
the one who was interested in arrows?
Yes, too,
yeah.
yes.
So you could use for that, instead of a simple line, you could choose a marker line, and you could choose to have just the marker on the last vertex. And then we have to add another simple line. So here I added a marker line symbol layer type so that the marker is just on the last vertex, so you can do things like that. I can also choose as a symbol layer type arrow. And that would create an arrow, and there's a bunch of settings for arrows we would want. We don't want the arrow in each segment. Yeah, there we go. Just want it on the last segment. And so you can go in and adjust that, and then you have arrows.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint to introduce this last section, which is going to talk about styles. I have a couple slides to show you this. So we talked about saving styles. So here in QGIS, let me reboot this. Whenever you've created a symbol like an airport SVG icon, you can always choose Save Symbol right below it. Give that symbol a name, give it a tag, add it to favorites, and it will then be available to you within QGIS from project to project to project. And it'll just be one of the symbols that you have access to. If you want to then apply that style, this little panel down here in the layer styling panel gives you access to all those styles. This is in the favorites category, but you can search for other tags. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can also copy and paste symbols. I think I showed that briefly. You can right click on a layer in the styling panel. Let me get out of here and show that. Must have screwed that up. Okay, so I can, for example, I could turn on roads here. No, I'm not gonna do that. So I could right click on this symbol and choose copy, and right click on roads, and why isn't it letting me paste? It should let me paste that. That's what happens when you try to do a live demo. Okay, let me try something else. So like churches here are all the churches. And if I like this symbol, I can right click on churches, and I can go to styles, copy style. And these are all the aspects that get saved in a style. It's pretty much everything. Copy that, and I can now turn on airports, and I could go down to styles and paste that style so that airports now have the same symbol as churches. So you can copy and paste styles between layers, even between layers in different QGIS projects very easily. I mentioned saving styles as QML files. If you go to layer properties to the Symbology tab, you can save a style as a QML file. And that would be like for this train layer where we had different symbols for each kind of train. This would save that entire classification and all the symbols in it. So QML files will save all the style aspects of that layer. And then we have the QGIS style manager, which is really used to store individual symbols. So by individual symbols, I mean like the symbol specifically for STO train lines stations here, or the symbol specifically for local trains here. So not the whole style of the entire layer, but individual symbols that you've used. So that's what this style manager is for. So you could save, for example, the icon, this symbol for STO, and have that as a saved style in your style manager, and it would show up here. And so in the style manager, you have tabs. You have all your symbols, one specifically for points, lines, polygons, color ramps for rasters and other things, text formats, label settings, legend patch shapes, and 3D symbols. So all these different kinds of styles you can manage from within here. You then have different tags. So you can tag things. So you may have tags for a specific customer or a particular project or a particular kind of project. And so you can have your symbols tagged to make them easy to find. You have thumbnails for all of them. You can import and export. So you can do all of that from in here. So let me show you that. If we have QGIS open, this is the icon for the symbol manager. And if I open this up, I can see all the different styles that came with QGIS. If I go to color ramps, I'll see that SDA terrain that I saved. And these are all my tags on the left-hand side. So let's say, let's go to this. This is a nice one, this STO. So let's go into here and tell QGIS I want to save this symbol as a default symbol, call it STO, and I'm going to tag this as transportation and add it to favorites. Click save. Well, immediately it shows up right there now as a symbol because I added it to favorites. If I open up my symbol manager, it's going to be there now as well. If I go to my marker symbols, it's one of those marker symbols. And this is my favorites that I'm looking at. I can also choose all, which I don't think will be much. Yeah, there's all. And then there's transportation is the tag I just added when I created that. So that's my one transportation symbol. But I can right click on this and I can add a tag to it. So I might have another tag that I want to use, like maybe train symbols, add that tag to it. So you can manage these tags as you need to, and they're just designed to make things easy to find for you. There's also this Browse Online Styles button down here. And this is nice because this opens up your web browser to the QGIS style repository. And these are interesting symbols that different QGIS users have added. And there's in the marker section for the Danish QGIS users, there is a series of natural life icons here that I added last year. These were produced by our nature agency in Denmark, and it's a set of 120 icons, and you can download that and pull them into your style manager and then use them in QGIS. And you may find other symbols in here that you want to try. So with any of these, you can download the symbol and import it into QGIS. So the way you would do that, and I'm going to have to undo something here real quick because I, again, forgot to undo this. I'm going to remove all these styles. I don't want them anymore. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, and I'm going to remove this tag. I'm going to go to import items, and I'm going to choose file as the type. And I'm going to browse into our course data. And there's a styles folder, and I included the XML file for that this outdoor icons that I just showed you online. And when I unzip it, there's this XML file. So I select this XML file. You just reads it and pulls in the icons for all those. So there's all these SVG icons. I can tell QGIS to add these to my favorites. I can add additional tags like nature and select all and import. It's usually very fast. Okay. So now when I choose nature, I see all those icons in here that I just imported. And they would be available. So for archaeology, for example, if I turn on, oh, you just crashed. Oh. Well, I have another one open here. Let me bring this over. So for archaeology, for example, I can turn on those archaeological points. And I think I should have those in here. I'm going to choose single symbol. And I have this Naturstrillen icons here. And what are those called? There we go. So I can choose the icon for those and apply it to my map and then make any adjustments that I want. So that's one way to bring icons in. If you want to do the opposite, if you want to export a bunch of things, you can go into here, and this is my full style manager with lots of categories. So I could go to that same category. I could select a couple of these that I was interested in, and I could go to import, export items, and choose, which items I want to export, and I would export them out to an XML file that someone else could import. And there was one question earlier in the class, we covered SVG icons and where they're stored. And if you are in an organization that wants to share icons, I know that there are some agencies who will have this path be on a central server that everyone has access to. So you could store your SVG icons on a central server, map everyone to it, so everyone has access to that same set. That would probably be the most efficient way to do that. Let's see. The other interesting thing to add with Symbology here is sometimes there's something that you just don't have data for, but you want to point it out on a map, or you want to mark a map up a little bit. And so QGIS fairly recently, before I show you that, there's a plugin I want to show you. related to sharing styles. QGIS has this resource sharing plugin. So there are members of the QGIS community who have shared a number of resources. Some of these are processing models, some are scripts, but some are symbols for things. So this resource sharing plugin is a way to share things. And it's very easy to use. This is the little icon for it, resource sharing. If I click on this, it opens up this resource sharing window, and you can see all of this material that people have shared. So some of these, it'll say they're icons. Earlier, I showed the map box, mappy icons, and so this is where I downloaded those from. There's a whole bunch of icons in here that you could have access to. Set of Swedish symbols. So there's a lot in here. So you can sift through that and see if there's anything that might be useful to you. The last thing I was going to show you is this thing called annotation layers. So in the last couple of releases of QGIS, they've added this annotations toolbar. And so annotations here is a way to mark up the map with things. So for example, I might want to point out something on the map, so I can create a line annotation here, and I can digitize a line, and then I could go into my styles and find like an arrow style and symbolize that line with an arrow, and then I could add some text, a text annotation, and say, look here, and make that bold and a little bigger. And then I can use another tool in this toolbar to move it. And now I have some markup on my map, and it's just annotations. It's not part of a GIS layer. And by default, these annotations are part of this annotations that you see. You'll always have this annotation section in layer styling, whether you have any or not. And by default, they're just part of these core annotations. And there's a processing tool to transfer those annotations to an annotation layer in the table of contents. So I can just run this. And now those annotations are right here, and I can turn them off and on. So it's an annotation layer that will act like any other layer, and it's simply markup. It's not actually a GIS layer, it's just stored in your project. But sometimes it's useful to have a simple tool like that to mark stuff up. So I wanted to point out that that's there quickly. Okay, so we've gotten through all the material that I had, and if there's, feel free to ask questions. I do have a couple closing slides to go through. I showed you the resource sharing plugin. There's also a thing called the Noun Project, which is a really nice place to search for SVG icons. So you may want to explore the Noun Project if you're looking for a nice set of icons. I have also written a couple of books on QGIS in the last year, the second edition of this one, QGIS for Hydrological Applications, and Discover QGIS. And Discover QGIS on the right has a whole section on cartography and another section on advanced data visualization, which you might find interesting. And I have another course, like the next logical course after this would be this data visualization course, which kind of goes to the next step, looking at blending modes in more detail, using expressions to tweak symbology, there's a thing in QGIS called the geometry generator, and the temporal controller, which lets you animate temporal data, use the 3D viewer. So we cover lots of kind of more advanced features in QGIS in this course. I also have a raster course. This actually starts tomorrow, but all these are regularly offered every spring and fall. I offer all these classes, so there'll be opportunities to take this course in the future. It's also online. And then a course on field data collection using this platform called Mergin Maps, which integrates really well with QGIS. So that's another interesting course. So check those out if you're interested. And we have a couple minutes for questions, if there are any.
Did we do the point displacement?
We didn't look at that, but I'll show you. It's that one is a little difficult. I'm going to turn on these archaeology points, and I'm just going to make them a simple marker real quick. I'm just going to make these smaller red points so I can show you that. So there's a lot of these points in this layer. Turn off some of this other stuff. I don't know, do they have? Why do they have? Let's do churches instead. Okay. So here's churches. They're still pretty densely spaced. So point displacement has several different settings. It's kind of complicated. You can use several methods for this. And the issue you have to keep in mind with this is that it's physically going to move the points apart from one another so that you can see them all. So you have to be careful about, because you're starting to lie with data. You're actually moving the points from their real location. So you have to play with the settings. This is the ring setting, concentric rings, and you can see there's like a symbol for the rings that kind of like connects you can see where the real point was and where it's moving those. So I usually want to make this transparent so you don't see that. And then the center symbol, I also usually want to make that transparent so that you don't see that as well. And now you're left with just the moved points, and you can start to adjust the settings to see how far you want them dispersed from their original location and which technique, grid, ring, etc. you want to use. They all leave kind of little artifacts, but you will get the true, you will be able to see all the points better that way.
So this might have worked with the metro station and the S station.
Yeah, we may, I don't know if you can use that in combination with a graduated renderer though, or categorized renderer. We'll have to look at that.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, of course.
Because we had it, we used categorical to break it into station types. I don't know if you can then use point displacement with it.
That's true.
So that one might be a little tricky, but I'll take a look at it. And Monday at 1400, we'll have our follow-up session. So after this, I'm going to send you the recording of this course as an unlisted YouTube video. So you'll be able to watch this recording, and I'm going to send you an assignment to finish by, I think I can give you a couple weeks to finish this. I think I'm giving you till May 8th, I believe, to finish the assignment. So you should have some time for that. And it's just going to have you repeating some of these steps And another thing you'll get with that email is a step-by-step instruction list for everything that we've gone through. Okay, well, thanks everyone. It's a great class. I really liked how engaged everyone was and all the questions were great. And I will see everyone next Monday.
Yes, bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.